There's a term in the NBA that has become common in the last 10 to 15 plus years that I can't stand. And it's the term Superteam. You might ask why I don't like that term. Because not one player, fan, content creator, sports analyst can give us a definitive definition on what a super team is. You see fans and creators talk about teams with multiple Hall of Famers or All-Stars and weaving that criteria in their arguments on why this team or that team is a super team. The problem with that is there are lots, and I mean lots of teams that fit that definition. Even Wikipedia tells us that there is no official definition or standards created to label a team a super team, but sees them as 3 or more Hall of Famers, All-Stars, and or All-NBA players coming together. That's another thing, the use of the word super. What does super mean? Well, some synonyms for super are excellent, superior, top-notch, exceptional. So by that measure, there's been a lot of super teams. In 2006, Dallas Mavericks were a top-notch, excellent team. Many believe they should have won the chip that year, myself included. However, looking at the names on the team doesn't give me, say, 1996 Chicago Bulls vibes. I mean, you of course had Dirk Nowitzki, but also Devin Harris, Josh Howard, Jerry Stackhouse. Very good players, but not exactly who we would consider super team worthy, but it checks the box of having, in hindsight, 3 all-star caliber players. Also by this definition, these 2 teams should be super teams. However, yeah, the rest is history. Where did the term come from? I believe it first started gaining life when Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen joined the Boston Celtics in the 2007-2008 season. Those two joined a Boston team that had only won 24 games the year prior, catapulted them to 66 wins in 2008 and a championship over the Los Angeles Lakers. After, it seemed NBA teams saw this as becoming the new blueprint for instant success. Sign a few all-star free agents or trade for disgruntled stars and fill in the gaps. And as we've seen through the years, for every Garnett and Allen to the Celtics, you have Dwight Howard and Steve Nash to Kobe's Los Angeles Lakers. For every LeBron James and Chris Bosh to D-Wade's Miami Heat, you have a Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden to the Brooklyn Nets. Teams commonly given the term are the 1986 Boston Celtics, the Showtime Los Angeles Lakers, the Bad Boy Pistons, the 90s Chicago Bulls, the Tim Duncan era San Antonio Spurs, the Shaq and Kobe Lakers, the aforementioned Big Three Celtics, the Heatles, and the mid-2010 Golden State Warriors. What do all of those teams have in common? All but one won multiple championships. Outside the 80s Lakers, 08 Celtics, and Heatles, all the other teams needed a few seasons with their core to get a cohesiveness that translated into winning and at times dominant basketball. I understand Duncan won in his second season, but he needed that 98 season to really get into the system. Thirdly, for the most part, all these teams had one key element in their arsenal for winning: ball movement. For as complex as we make basketball, it can become simple with buy-in and discipline. Moving the ball can absolutely destroy an opposing team's defense, and ball movement is a key part of playing basketball the right way. We were mesmerized by the Showtime Lakers, that mid-2010 Spurs, and the Golden State Warriors. But all they did was what any good program, coach, team should incorporate, and that is passing and cutting and going from a good shot to a great shot. It's how the Spurs decimated the Heat in 2014. It's how the Warriors ravaged teams for 3 dominant rings in the late 2010s. Even the Big Three Miami Heat with a good coach, I hate the narrative that LeBron James never won with a good coach, because it undermines what Coach Eric Spoelstra did for those teams. But with that team, LeBron wasn't super ball dominant like he can and could be. He had players that he had to trust. Same with those 90s Bulls teams. Though Jordan took the bulk of the shots, they got to the mountaintop and stayed there once they fully embraced the triangle and incorporated ball movement and drawing in the defense and hitting the open man. While this does rely on getting the almost perfect personnel, and hits on a point I will make a little later, but there is a sense of luck when constructing these teams that you find the right fits for all necessary roles. My biggest problem with the term is how it seems these teams have an unfair advantage over the league and found a cheat code to winning. Makes it seem like it's just easy for those quote-unquote super teams to rack up wins and is basically effortless. You can simply buy a championship team. This doesn't take into the consideration a good amount of these teams are constructed through the draft or all the hard work those guys have to go through in preparation. The attention to detail that is given to their team and teammates, The system that is put into place and pounded into their psyche to execute on a nightly basis and try to make it work. The coaching and staff that goes into creating consistent winning basketball. The individual work that those players have to endure in the offseason to make sure that they can keep up their part in the success of those teams. But ultimately, the one thing we seem to want to overlook when it comes to these super teams is that what all of these teams needed sprinkled into their success is luck. Creating these teams and putting players together isn't as easy as just checking stats and thinking since they can all score at high clips that you can put them together and the mixture will mesh. Basically, these teams aren't just a culmination of putting together the best and most elite players at each position or at each role. They're the culmination of hard work, planning, scouting, and luck. Why didn't the 1999 Houston Rockets work with the still able Scottie Pippen and aging Charles Barkley and Hakeem Olajuwon? Why didn't Dwight Howard and Steve Nash work with Kobe Bryant in the 2013 season? Similarly, why did adding Kawhi Leonard to the San Antonio Spurs give them some much-needed life? Why did adding Andre Iguodala to the Golden State Warriors in 2014 help them reach Larry O'Brien in 2015? All of these were gambles. For that Rockets team, Barkley was old, Hakeem was old, and Scottie was getting up there. It's not like they were bad. They were a playoff team, but a far cry from their primes. The 2013 Lakers had luck, but not the good kind. Dwight and Kobe couldn't find a common ground on the court, and Steve Nash was injured for most of his time there and far from his prime. It was the opposite for Spurs, who gambled on a player from San Diego State at the 15th pick and traded George Hill for him. At the time, I hated that move because I thought George Hill was a Spur for life. Pop and crew knew what they were doing, and he mixed in perfectly with those Spurs veterans, and well, the rest is history. Iggy is another one, going from being an all-star and the man in Philly to being traded to the Warriors where his role was changed by the fact that he bought in and was prepared to use his skill set in the best way to strengthen that team. Again, the rest is history. These are just a few examples of how certain gambles pay off and others end in disaster. But through all of them, it is either planned out well or let's just see what happens mentality. We always hear how those second three-peat Bulls were basically unfair and how Mike had Scottie, Rodman, and Kukoc. But Rodman was fresh off of getting obliterated by Hakeem in the playoffs in the 94-95 season. Rodman was a volatile player and had worn out his welcome in San Antonio. On top of that, Rodman was 34 years old, so he was closing in on being an elder in the NBA. Simply put, they made a gamble that paid off. Whenever teams bring in free agents or trade for players that are needed to fill a glaring role, there are some, like Rodman, that step up to the challenge. It was a success, and a major success, but not because of just plug and play, but because Rodman and the Chicago Bulls organization was able to create a synergy that maximized his strength and integrated into their system to help them become an even better team. The same can be said for Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen in Boston, as both were in their 30s and had been the focal point of their prior teams, but had to take a back seat in Boston to Paul Pierce and use their strengths to weave well-balanced team. Just for hindsight purposes, let's look at the last 5 NBA champions and see if these fit the super team logic. The 2019 Toronto Raptors had 2 All-Stars in Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry. They defeated a very unlucky Golden State Warriors that was ravaged by injuries. So were the Raptors, by Wikipedia's definition, a super team? Only 2 All-Stars, but they had Marc Gasol on this team as well, who had been an All-Star before. So maybe they checked that box. 3 Hall of Famers? Only see 1 for sure. Kawhi was the only Raptor to make an All-NBA team that season, so that disqualifies them from being Wiki's definition of a super team. The 2020 Los Angeles Lakers, they had 2 All-Stars that season in LeBron James and Anthony Davis. This was the bubble championship during the crazy times that were COVID-19's quarantine. So were they a super team? Only 2 All-Stars that season, but had former All-Stars Dwight Howard and Rajon Rondo, past their primes but still valuable pieces. I can see 3 Hall of Famers come from that group, and maybe even a 4th, if they're kind to Rondo. 2 All-NBA players in LeBron and AD that season, so I guess they could be summed up as a super team at that time. The 2021 Milwaukee Bucks took down a solid Phoenix Suns squad. How many All-Stars did they have? For that season, 1, Giannis Antetokounmpo. But they did have Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday that had been All-Stars before. 3 Hall of Famers. If the committee is very lenient, Drew possibly, but I don't see it. So only 1 player there. Only 1 All-NBA player that season as well. So by definition, not a super team. The 2022 Golden State Warriors, I think it's obvious, but they had 3 All-Stars that season, but not all who you think as Steph, Draymond, and Andrew Wiggins were selected. 3 Hall of Famers? Probably. I can see Steph, Clay, and Draymond all getting the nod at some point. All NBAs that season? Only Steph, but by definition, they checked most boxes, so I guess they were a super team. Finally, 2023 Denver Nuggets had 1 All-Star, Nikola Jokic. 3 Hall of Famers? We'll see what Jamal Murray's game does as he hits his peak, but for now, absolutely not 3. All NBA, only Jokic there as well. So not a super team, even though they're regarded as one of the best teams in the NBA, then and now currently. So by the wiki logic of the last 5 champions, 2 were super teams by loose definition. But what makes more sense is this fact. They had core players that had been together for multiple years to create a chemistry and identity to compete, and plug in all-star or star caliber players didn't mess up the chemistry but helped build upon what they already had. Yeah, there are teams that try to fast-track success, but for the very few that succeed at that, there are way more horror stories of teams that failed. Just look at the 2019 Golden State Warriors, who added all-star DeMarcus Cousins to a roster that already had Steph, Clay, Draymond, and KD. The luck I've been talking about swung its pendulum to the Toronto Raptors, who also added an all-star in Kawhi Leonard and former all-star Marc Gasol, but kept that core that had been together for a while, and the results were a ring. Look at those 2014 Brooklyn Nets, who tried to add aging Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, hoping to catch that Celtic lightning in a bottle and pair them with Joe Johnson and Darren Williams, but ended up being worse than the 2013 team was, and Pierce would jump ship the following year. So with all this said, you can only say super teams were an actual thing when you have hindsight. And as the term picked up speed, we can see a majority of the Wikipedia definition of multiple All-Stars and or Hall of Famers have failed in their mission, which is always an NBA championship. So I'm sure the term super team will continue to be used, but why not call it what it really is? A very good basketball team. In fact, why not call them a basketball team? Because that's exactly what they are. They're no different than the other 29 teams that step foot on the court. They just understood the intricacies, put in the work to grow together, create a system that maximized the strengths and weaknesses of all involved, and had a little luck while doing it. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If so, please like and subscribe to the channel and help us reach that 1K sub goal. Also, if you have time, check out myself and Big Nige on the GOATcast podcast, where we discuss topics from the present, past, and even future. Thank you all, and be back soon with more content.